Good afternoon. Attorney Protective would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Sobriety Checkpoint, Evaluating and Overcoming a Substance Use Disorder. With that, I would like to introduce your first speaker, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Kate. So today we're going to talk about an introduction to lawyer assistance programs, the goals for the day, our substance use disorders, a problem with attorneys, signs and symptoms with some examples, possibly from our own lives, the disease of substance use disorder, ethical duties for lawyers and firms, and how you can help. We'll also provide some resources and then question and answers. So our goals for today are to talk about how to recognize the signs and symptoms of substance use disorders, to gain a basic understanding of substance use disorders and depression, a review of ethical responsibilities, and to learn about resources and how to intervene. So just for that small balance of what we're going to get through today, there's a lot to talk about. Our substance use disorder is a problem with attorneys, and that is something that is significant. So there was a survey that was done in 2015. This article came out in 2016. I'm happy to say that they're going to redo a survey later this year, and so in 2026 we should have updated information. It will be interesting to compare the 2015 survey with the 2025 survey. But in that survey that was done, so first of all, think about it's a survey, so you're asking lawyers to be honest about their substance use issues, their substance use at all, and their mental health issues. And so in general, we think this might be an underreport, but they defined alcohol-dependent drinking, harmful, hazardous, and potentially alcohol-dependent was defined as problematic drinking. So that's basically what they were looking at. And the attorneys in that survey, about 20% of the attorneys came back with a possible problematic drinking. That was about twice the rate of other highly educated professionals. That was a different survey that was done. And then in terms of mental health, anxiety, and stress, you can see on the slide that 28% had symptoms of depression. This was a survey, so they couldn't diagnose. 19% had symptoms of anxiety, and 23 symptoms of stress. And then past history of mental health concerns, so almost half the attorneys had some experience of depression. 61% of attorneys had experienced anxiety. And I sort of jokingly say that the other 39% were just in denial because anybody who's been a lawyer has experienced anxiety. 16% with social anxiety, 12% with ADHD, and 11.5% with suicidal thoughts. Erica and I both live in Go ahead.
And this is Erica. Yeah, this is Erica Grigg. I'm your other speaker. And first of all, I want to say that picture of me that's a part of my bio. Oh my gosh, I wish I still looked like this. I'm so glad that this is just like a call-in. I'm never updating that picture. It's a great picture. But Michelle and I kind of riff off of each other when we're doing these presentations, and I want to kind of chime in here and say, I think it's interesting, and Michelle's already alluded to that we think these numbers are even higher than you're seeing in front of you. And part of that is because, we know as attorneys we're not very good at showing chinks in our armor or even coming forward and being honest about what we're experiencing. But then also, I think some of us, we have been stressed out and depressed and anxious for so long, we think it's normal. We're just like, well, I guess this is how life is going to be, that this is adulting. And Michelle and I are here to suggest to anyone that feels that way that, that doesn't have to be there. And that doesn't have to be the case. And so I think also, unique to our profession is that we are so stressed out, and we have been so stressed out since law school that we've just kind of accepted it as just our new reality. And I just wanted to chime in, Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt, and just say, hey, this doesn't have to be reality.
Totally. And Erica, thanks. Like, it's so good to be talking with you again. Erica and I used to work together day in and day out, and so we have PTSD from each other. But she's one of my favorite people to talk with and work with. So as you can tell, Erica has a lot of energy, and I'm more calm and sedate. And Erica's going to talk a little bit about her.
We were the perfect team.
Yeah, we were in great balance. If we can look at the next slide. So the question is, are substance use disorders a problem with attorneys? And I think most of you wouldn't be tuned into this if you didn't think there was a significant issue. And Erica, you went to the University of Texas School of Law, and I heard there's kegs every Friday afternoon on campus.
In the middle of the atrium. Yep.
Yeah. So, alcohol is such a big part of the practice of law. I went to law school in Seattle, and I went to school at night, and half the time there was some buffet with alcohol, and that was how I fed myself in the evenings. I would grab some food from the buffet and a glass of wine and take it into class. So, I think there is no question that substance use disorders are a problem with attorneys.
Well, and I'll say, kind of relevant to this slide too, Michelle, is, and my story. So, for me, I knew, I had a problem, I know now, a lifetime. My earliest memories since I was in middle school, I always had like this hamster in the wheel in my head that was telling me that I was a phony, that I wasn't enough, that no one liked me, that no one would accept me. And I know that now to be major depressive disorder. But, I always just kind of had these voices in my head that I was a phony. And when I got to law school, nothing like law school to make you even more insecure. And when you've got a disease that's kind of telling you to look for information that you don't belong, that you are a phony, nothing like law school to find that information, right? I made my first C in law school. But all this to say that my drinking, alcohol, the depression I was feeling, the anxiety I was feeling, alcohol was such a convenient thing. It was easily accessible. It was legal. It was everywhere to help me, in air quotes, I say, escape how I was feeling about myself. And, it was inevitable that problem, me going to alcohol to escape the stress, the anxiety, and just my depression, it was inevitable that it was going to get worse. And if you look at, Michelle will go over these statistics here at the bottom of the slide, but this is absolutely my story. It was easy, accessible, and it changed how I felt in 20 minutes. And so it became something I used to very badly manage my anxiety.
So I don't really need to go through the statistics because I think people can read them, but, people that identify the alcohol, like it happens before law school, during law school, with 15 years of graduation and more than 15 years after law school. So I think the first, during law school and the first 15 years of practice seem to be the biggest risks for developing a substance use disorder. But why don't you talk about what happened for you, Erica?
So, my story, it's an interesting one, and it is a cautionary tale. So my drinking got worse and worse. Law school, it was terrible. I had to drink to get any sleep at night. I had to drink in the morning because by my third year, I was physically addicted to alcohol, so I'd have tremors in the morning until I took a drink. Took the bar, passed it. It's a miracle. I still check to see if my name is on that list because I'm not sure I believe it. But yeah, I passed the bar, and then now I'm practicing law. And I mean, that's the rubber meets the road. I mean, now I can be sued for malpractice. You know, there are a whole host of new responsibilities for us, as we all know, when we are actually licensed and practicing. And, you know, I had an unmanaged substance use disorder. Alcohol was my drug of choice, and I had this unmanaged major depressive disorder. And so what started to happen, and you know, we'll talk about this later on because we talk about, you know, signs of attorneys, like if they might be struggling, and here were mine. I mean, I wouldn't call back a client for anything because I knew that client would tell me that I was not doing the job that they had entrusted me to do, and they would be correct because I was lying to my employer about meeting deadlines. I was telling my employer that I was meeting deadlines that I was not meeting. I was late to hearings, late to depositions, canceling hearings, canceling depositions. I mean, my schedule revolved around if I was sober, which was never, and if I was hungover, which was always. And I remember, and I'm going to let y'all know that my story, part of my story is I attempted suicide. And I understand that suicide is a triggering subject. I understand it's a very serious and hard subject to talk about, but I feel like it's important for me to really kind of share this. And for those of y'all that are triggered right now, you know, about the topic of suicide, just tune back in like 3 minutes, because I do think it's important that I share this. So about 6 months leading up to my suicide attempt, which was 15 years ago, it was around Mother's Day, about this time of year. About 6 months leading up to this, my attempt, I just remember thinking, you know, grievances were coming because, again, remember, I was lying to my employers about the work I was doing. I wasn't doing it. I wasn't calling clients back. I mean, I knew grievances were coming. I was just praying for God to take me in my sleep about 6 months leading up to the actual attempt. Just please take me in my sleep. I couldn't, my parents had sacrificed so much for me to get the education that I had, and I was throwing it away. These attorneys that hired me, that took a chance on me, you know, I was a C student. I wasn't anything impressive. You know, I was throwing their reputation away by what I was doing, and my drinking and, you know, was just jeopardizing everything. And so, but I couldn't stop. I tried to get some sobriety behind me, and I couldn't get anything significant. And so I just prayed for God to take my life. And a couple weeks leading up to my attempt, I remember, and I live in a part of Texas called the Texas Hill Country. And if you know anything about it, it's like canyons and winding roads. And I remember I left this Mother's Day dinner, and I was driving down these winding, canyony roads, and I thought to myself, you know, all I have to do to end it all would be to drive off one of these roads into one of these canyons. And that's Mother's Day night. That's exactly what I did. And I lived. And, I mean, secret was out. My parents were shocked that had happened. My very closest friends were shocked. My coworkers were shocked. No one had any idea how deeply tormented I was. And, you know, I went to treatment. I mean, it was hard to argue that I didn't need professional help. The, you know, cat was out of the bag, so to speak, and I went into treatment for 5 weeks. And about 3 weeks into treatment, I got this phone call. For those of you that haven't been to treatment, there are times in the day where you can take phone calls, especially if you're a professional. And this phone call came in, and it was a lawyer friend of mine, and she said, "You've got to call the Lawyers Assistance Program, the Texas," because that's where I was, Lawyers Assistance Program. And that phone call just changed my life because I was able to get the resources that I need, paired with an attorney that could help. And we'll talk more about that later. And I don't share my story with you all for sympathy or to scare you. And when I was in law school, I had no idea that my biggest challenges wouldn't be in the legal realm or like academic challenges. They would be these mental health challenges, because we see some of us really test things. We see people at their worst. I mean, are you even a real attorney if you haven't had your life threatened? I don't know. We get our lives threatened, right? Like, we go through so much. And if we don't have we don't ask for help, and we don't have ways to kind of process what's happening, our brain can start to tell us really things that seem so believable that are so dangerous. And that's what happened to me. And so I know that was a long kind of maybe rabbit trail, but I think it's important because it's exactly what I went through, exactly what I experienced is going to be a part of some of the stuff we see going forward. And that's my story, and I'm glad I got help, and it's been 15 years, and I've got 15 years sobriety and managing my mental health to the best of my ability. But sorry, I'm coughing.
Well, and Erica, the next slide talks about the effectiveness of lawyer-specific treatment and the barriers to seeking treatment. So
oh my gosh,
you didn't get to go to a lawyer-specific treatment, but nevertheless,
I went.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I will say I know the statistics say that we see more success when there are programs that cater to professionals. But y'all, I went to like the bottom of the barrel rehab because it's what my insurance would pay for, and it worked for me. I mean, mainly it scared the tar out of me. But, but yeah, we do know that for some people that going to a treatment program that specifically caters to professionals, that can yield more successful results long term. But I'll tell you, I'm not that statistic. I'm the statistic of I went to like a local treatment hospital, and I mean, it changed my life. So,
well, and some of the barriers to seeking treatment. So they found in the survey that it was not wanting others to know that you need help. I think that's very something you experience, Erica, but something we all experience.
100%.
You know? Right, like being an attorney.
100%.
Yeah. We all want to present ourselves in the best light. We want to fight the hardest for our clients. And I talk a lot about lawyering while you're living. Like life happens while you're being a lawyer, and
that's
lawyers
right.
Ignore that they have medical issues, that their family, they lose parents, that we had to live through a global pandemic. You know, we just keep pushing on, and it's important to have people you can talk with about what's going on in your life.
You're so right. I mean, we don't practice law in a vacuum.
Right. So, you know, we have lives, but our clients really, most of the time, they don't care what's going on in our lives. They don't care if we're having a medical issue or a divorce. They want their results, right? So if we could move to the next slide and talk about the signs and symptoms, and maybe, Erica, you can talk about what it was like for you.
Sure.
So, actually, I mean, both of us have experienced depression.
Yes. Talk about yours.
Yeah, so I guess I feel pretty lucky. I lived in Seattle. Anybody who's been in that part of the country knows it gets dark, and I have what is called seasonal affective disorder. So in the fall, when the time changes, I have a physiological reaction. My body feels different, and I get depressed. And I moved to Texas 6 years ago, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to be golden in Texas because it's sunny all the time.
you can't get away from it down here.
I know. So, but the first year I was here in the fall, it was fine. But the second year, I had that same feeling. And I think part of this, if we can tell you anything, like Erica's experiences and mine, you have to know yourself. And so I knew exactly what was happening. It didn't make sense because it was sunny, but it's just something I struggle with. Seasonal affective disorder, so a low-grade depression. And for me, that means taking an antidepressant. That's one of the things we recommend for people. The second thing is talk therapy. So Erica's a therapist. I was a therapist before I was a lawyer. We go to school to learn how to talk to people. Therapy is different than friendships. It costs a lot more. but it is a place to get help with depression, and then, having some place where you feel unconditional positive support, I think, is what we call the three-legged stool. Talk therapy, medication if you need it, and some support group. So, Erica, do you want to talk about some symptoms for you of depression?
Yeah. Well, if you're looking at the signs and symptoms slide, that was all my story, right? Client neglect, unreturned phone calls, late for depositions, canceled appointments, early stages, late for hearings, all of that. And these were all a part of my story, a very real part. And if you're worried about a colleague, wondering if someone might be experiencing a substance use disorder or struggling, these are definitely things that you look for. We are with our professional colleagues often more than we are with our own family members. And we really get to know them. And we get to know what their work habits are. We get to know what, their energy level is. And, if you are working with someone who never has missed a deadline, in the 5 years that you work with them, and all of a sudden they're just missing deadline after deadline, it may not be a substance use disorder, but trust your gut. Something might be going on. And whether it's depression or anxiety or substance use disorder or burnout or anything, I think that we need to trust our guts more and just ask, someone, are things okay? I've noticed that, you're not turning in things on time, and that's just not in your character. But we really have a unique perspective, with our colleagues, in that we're with them so much. We really do sometimes we know that there are problems before even their families do. And so, these are definitely the slide, the signs and symptoms and things to look for. And if we go to the next slide, here are some more. These are general signs and symptoms of depression, changing in sleep patterns. And this is for you as well. Obviously not just colleagues, but up here, your mood changes, weight loss or gain. Anhedonia, like loss of interest in activities that, you used to love. You used to love to go sailing, and now you're like, you could care less. That boat has been in, the garage for 2 years. Definitely concentration, changes in concentration, energy levels. Isolating is something that, go.
So I want to say first, anhedonia. That's a really big word, Erica. So we know that you're smart.
Good.
But I think, too, some of these, I would imagine anybody, and if you aren't getting regular physicals, you should. Please do. But I know for me, when I go see my doctor, they give me a little questionnaire that asks about these things, and it's usually some form of the Beck Depression Inventory. It's a quick screening device for your doctor to talk to you. So that's one place. If you're feeling some of these symptoms or feeling depressed, then you can talk with your doctor about that, which is great. I think it's great that doctors are starting to ask about because depression, substance use disorder, those are medical diagnoses. Those are things doctors can help with. So,
absolutely. Okay, I think next slide. Signs and symptoms.
These are.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I just want to say, Erica, you talked about this when you were getting 6 months before your attempt. The depression, not returning calls, at open mail. And the other point that you made is, if we notice there's changes in the behavior of people who are normally reliable and suddenly they're not. Erica talking about asking a colleague, like, are you okay? I've noticed this. One of the things that we do as attorneys is front. we pretend like everything's fine and we pretend like we know exactly what we're going to talk about in court. And sometimes we do, but most of the time we make it up. And so I think it's important for us to, with each other, to provide that connection and to say, hey, I've noticed, because we want to lie to ourselves, or we think nobody else notices. So I think it's important to do.
Agree. I think next slide, please. So myths about substance abuse. If you are questioning if maybe you are struggling with a substance abuse problem or a colleague is struggling with a substance abuse problem, I think that telling or saying I don't drink every day or I only drink on the weekends, so I can't, so I obviously don't have a substance use problem. That isn't how substance abuse is measured. I know with me, and I'm sorry, someone's pointed out that this webinar is dwelling so much on one person's experience. I'm guessing that's mine, but I think it's important that I, do offer a personal experience and connect these slides to something that's actually happened. But something that I did was, I remember I was like, well, I'm only going to drink vodka. And so I'm, that's going to help me not drink as much, or I'm only going to drink, and if you find yourself sort of putting parameters or bargaining with yourself about how you're going to drink or what you're going to drink, that could definitely be a sign that you might be struggling with a substance use disorder. But thinking that it's the amount you drink necessarily or the frequency at which you drink, we look much more at how the drinking is affecting someone's life, their ability to show up, the amount of risks they might be taking, how it's affecting their social life. And the next point here, if someone is an alcoholic, there's nothing you can do until they decide to treat, until they decide that they're ready for help. I don't agree with that. That's not my experience. I don't think I ever would have been ready for help. My family sitting with me and telling me that I needed to go get help got me where I needed to be. And once I was there, I was ready for help, and I did change. Michelle, any ideas about this slide?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, people go to treatment multiple times. People intervene with alcoholics multiple times. You never know which is the time that will make a difference. So,
that's right.
Ultimately, everyone's behavior is their own, but it's our responsibility to care for our colleagues and to say, hey, this is not, you think you're drinking like other lawyers, but you're not. This, or it's impacting you, and I'm concerned. So I think it's important, that maybe you're going to have to talk to someone more than once, because we just never know when the time will be
That's
that
right.
they decide to do something. So, and I just recently did a presentation of what does an alcoholic look like, and had a picture of kind of somebody, on the street, and another picture of a person in a suit. We don't know, alcoholics look like any other people. And, one of the things lawyers are good at is, like I said, fronting. So if you're struggling inside or, covering the struggle with alcohol, then you're exactly what an alcoholic looks like.
I see here in the questions, someone wrote, and I think we hear this a lot, and it's, quote, I'm doing fine at work and life. And they're obviously offering that as something that they've probably heard someone say. What Michelle and I both experienced as, directors of the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program as, eventually it'll catch up with you. And yeah, okay, so now you're kind of functioning at work, abusing substances the way you are, but it works until it doesn't work anymore, right? And so to the person that commented, you're so correct. Like, that is something that we do here, is that I'm fine, I'm able to do my job. And the problem is substance use or, alcoholism. It's a progressive disease. And, what you were, like, for example, in law school for me, like, I was able to do my first 2 years pretty well being an alcoholic. My third year, it was a disaster. Eventually it caught up to me and it wasn't the same. So I think, are we doing next slide?
Yeah. So like you said, it's a progressive disease. If you don't treat it, it's likely to be, you either stop drinking or you die. And I think, your experience, Erica, is that this is treatable. I lived with an alcoholic. My stepfather was in recovery for 47 years. He never drank again after, some time when my mother basically said stop. But I think relapse is common, and it's something, we have to have grace with the people in our lives who struggle. I mean, whether it's substance use disorder or depression like I have, I think, it's important that we provide a safe place. And that's, Erica and I work together at the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, and we'll talk some more about the lawyer assistance programs around the country. But, we are a safe place to ask questions, to get help, because talking with us is statutorily confidential. And I think that's the case across most lawyer assistance programs.
Agreed. Next slide, please.
So,
this is just the DSM definition of substance use. So the DSM is the Bible for therapists. It's like the mental health disorder. It's where we go to diagnose people with mental health disorders, or to see what particular diagnosis someone might have. And kind of just what I was saying earlier was, it's not so much the myths about am I an alcoholic or not, or do I drink too much or not, or whatever. We don't really look at amount as much as these criteria, right? And so it's, how are you able to fulfill important roles in your life? How is it affecting your social problems and social relationships? Are you taking risks? Are you doing physically hazardous things? All of these sort of criteria are taken into account when diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder. And then you'll see kind of the second part of this slide, which is the severity. So we also look at the severity of the substance use disorder, and you'll see that it's mild, moderate, or severe. And it's just based on how many of the criteria that you meet.
Right. And I think it's great. The DSM is something to check for yourself, but it's also a way that insurance codifies whether they will cover your treatment.
That's right.
And the next slide is kind of the more simplistic definition. So if you continue to use despite problems related to the substance, so that is the simple definition. And I'm sure most of you have heard that that if you continue, like a mental health problem is if you continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. If you're continuing to have, problems related to your substance use, like inability to wake up, not completing deadlines, inability to connect with your significant others or colleagues, and you continue to use, that's the simple definition. Do you have anything to add, Erica?
No, ma'am. Next slide, please.
So the ethical duties for lawyers and law firms. So each state has, slightly different. So let's go through kind of these model rules and talk about, next slide, rules regarding impaired lawyers. So 1.1 is we all have a duty to provide competent representation. And I think if you are in the throes of a mental health crisis or a substance use disorder, the question is, are you competent? There's a lot of states who are that are working, to say basically competence involves self-care
That's right.
and mental health. So, as this slide indicates, warning signs: if you haven't prepared, if you're not doing the CLE requirements, if you're under the influence at work, the question is whether or not you can provide competent representation.
And Michelle, I think I want you to address, because this is your life every day there at TLAB, like the connection between depression or a substance use disorder and disciplinary action.
Right. So, the number of attorneys who have grievances filed against them with mental health or substance use problems is significant. And before I worked for the Lawyer Assistance Program, I worked in the disciplinary system as kind of a diversion program. But the reason they wanted me to work with them is that I have mental health training and I'm a lawyer. And I think it's important to remember that if you get involved with a grievance due to your mental health or substance use issues, you can contact the LAP, the Lawyer Assistance Program. And I see people all the time who are afraid to call, afraid to get help because they think lawyers' assistance programs are going to talk to the disciplinary system. And we are absolutely confidential. We barely keep notes. My job is great because I don't have 6-minute billable hours. I don't have to keep notes. I have lots of other things that I'm taking care of. But, in terms of some of those concerns, or people believe that if they talk to the Lawyer Assistance Program, they're going to be found out. And, seriously, disciplinary system it takes so long to get through that system that by the time you've taken care of yourself, if there's a grievance filed against you, they're going to want to know what have you done since the time of the grievance, the activity. And for you to be able to say, I've gotten therapy or I've been to treatment, that's going to benefit you, immeasurably.
Yep. Agree. Okay, next slide, please.
So what is a material impairment? Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I think it's important. Material impairment is the inability to complete the case. That if you have a material impairment, and I think, we think of this as, a crisis, and a lot of times it is, but this could happen if you have a physical impairment, if you had a stroke, if you had, long COVID, or, it's not just for mental health. And so reducing the stigma of those things is important. The issue is denial of the substance use disorder. And we all know people who are clearly impaired who continue to practice law. We see them, we know them, and I think it's really a matter of if they work in a firm, that their colleagues talk to them. If they're solos, one of the things we do in Texas is talk to law office managers, we talk to paralegals, we talk to anybody, because the legal community is not just lawyers. And it's important for everybody in the legal community to know about these issues and to know about resources. So, Erica, do you want anything to add?
No. I do. No, I'm going to wait. So next slide, please.
Okay. So the duty of law firms, I think, a lot of times there might be a rainmaker who's bringing in the business, and so nobody wants to rock the boat. But if, the supervising attorney is responsible if they know of the conduct and fail to take remedial action. So this one, the discomfort with interpersonal issues is, I hear so much, it's not my business. I don't know how to say those questions. I don't know how to ask someone, and part of this is just being human and saying, like, yeah, this is an uncomfortable thing. I'm not sure how to talk to you about this, but I've noticed this. And I talk to people often about, how to plan to talk to someone. I think this also talks about close scrutiny once an impairment is known. So urging the lawyer, who is your client? Is it the people paying your bills? And making sure that the firm doesn't get covered, doesn't get sued because of an inability to address a very blatant problem. And, I think it's so important. Attorney Protective provides some advice about this. I tell people talk to their insurance carriers when they're in a firm. I think it's important to know, whether you do it confidentially. You don't have to say names necessarily, but I think it's important to make sure that these kinds of issues don't get brushed under the rug. And what you may do, not just improve the firm, but save a life.
Well, and then
Next
the
slide.
Obligation to protect client may include confronting a lawyer. I just want y'all to know that, and we will let you know how to kind of locate your lap, like wherever you are, because each state, almost every state in the U.S. has a lawyer's assistance program, and they're all kind of different, but almost everyone does. But LAPS can be an excellent resource if you are not sure how to have a conversation to confront a lawyer about these things. You can ask the LAP to help you craft a conversation. It's what we do. It's what we're trained to do. And if you're feeling lost or worried you're going to hit, a landmine, LAPS can really help you plan that conversation in a way that's going to be beneficial to you and also the lawyer that you're wanting or needing to confront.
And I think, next slide, please. This is one of my favorite rules. So check your state's rules of disciplinary conduct or professional conduct and see. So the model rule 8.3 requires that if you know that there's an impairment or a substantial question as to the lawyer's fitness, you need to report that attorney. And in Texas, you're allowed to report, instead of reporting to discipline, you can report to the lawyer assistance program. And it's such a kind thing to do. Nobody wants to report to discipline. We all hate the disciplinary system. And, as lawyers, we feel really violated that we're paying dues to somebody who may take our license away. But we are a self-regulating profession, and so I like to say we're self-regulating, but we're also self-caring. And so built into this 8.3 is the ability to get help for that attorney, or at least to try. And I often tell people, thank you so much for letting us know. We'll try and intervene, and but don't figure this as the end of the road. If things continue, call us again. Call us again, because as we said before, it might be the first time that somebody, talks about this, that they get help, but it might be the 11th time. And, it's just, I feel like it's important for us not to give up on people. A substantial question as to a lawyer's fitness, so a pattern of conduct, those are pretty obvious. If people are drunk in the office, if they're, drunk at court, that's a pattern. There are single acts that can be so egregious that it's just, you're clear that it might just be the first act that you've seen. And I love the idea that, I mean, not really love, but there is a whole body of law around holiday parties, right? That people go to the Christmas party of the firm and they lose control, and there's a whole practice area for that. So we know that it can be a single act. And, I think this last quote is really important. So is the condition materially impacting the representation of clients? So that's what you need to think about if you're a colleague in a firm. But if, you don't need to think about that if you're just a friend or a colleague that's concerned about someone. Really is, has their behavior caused you to have concerns, and you can express that. It doesn't mean you're right or wrong. It just means that you have care.
One thing I do want to say with this slide with, and like you said, Michelle, most laps you can report. I mean, we have a due report if a colleague is impaired, most of us in most of our states, that you can report to a lap, and that satisfies your duty to report without having to go to a disciplinary arm. I want to say that there are some laps that are tied to the disciplinary part of their bars. And I think like Louisiana might be one. Don't quote me on that because it's been 5 years since I've done this, the lap part. So really do make sure when you're researching your lap that you find out sort of, what their connection is. I know in Texas, like Michelle said, we are completely separate. We are confidential. We are protected. We are firewalled. And I think most laps are. But there are a few in Louisiana comes to mind where they are connected. So just be informed. That's all I wanted to add to that, Michelle.
Absolutely, Erica. And I think people have asked where you can find how to access your lawyer assistance program. So every state and some of the provinces in Canada have lawyer assistance programs. And if you're part of the ABA, the Council on Lawyer Assistance Programs, so COLAP, is where you can Google that, sign in to your ABA site, and you can find the lawyer assistance program for your state. And maybe, you can Google it too. So just do, whatever state you're in, and you will find your lap. I know in Washington State it's the Lawyer Wellness Program. Some are the lawyer and judges assistance program. They're all called something different, and they all function a little bit differently. But there's a lot of resources there. So I encourage people to turn, like Erica said, turn to your lawyer assistance program. So do you want to talk about this?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So some model policies to think about at your work is, prohibiting use of alcohol at work. I think there's education, like these kinds of trainings, and involve the entire firm is really important. A lot of times the people who see an attorney struggle are the office manager, the person who answers the phone, the paralegal. In court, it's often the clerks or the bailiffs and not the judge, because we want to be on our best behavior in front of the judge. So talking about prevention, and treatment options, and knowing that, treatment can be very effective. So that's encouraging. Protocol for reporting. So what are you going to do? What's your office policy for how to talk, to HR, if that's what it is? And then if someone goes to treatment or has a significant, breach at work, what is the return to work agreement? And I think there is a model policy for New York that is listed in here. And I just want to say, it's important to look at whether or not the impairment is you know, is what you're doing at work in compliance with the ADA. And the fact that you've trained someone and spent so much time and energy with them it's important that we don't just give up on people. So I think a return to work agreement spells things out really well. Next slide.
Something I wanted to add to that last slide, and you don't need to go backwards, is that, something that we know is that if there are leaders in law firms that are watching this, and listening to this, we saw a lot of times at TLAP, and I know Michelle still sees it, is that, firms will have these beautiful wellness policies on paper, or they will have these very compassionate policies about, taking leave, taking care of yourself on paper. But what I will tell you is that if associates are not seeing partners or shareholders or whatever, however you're set up, doing these things or being true to that piece of paper, they are not going to feel comfortable going to treatment, going to therapy. We have to lead by example, those of us that have been around a while that are in these firms. And I mean, not everyone's comfortable sharing, of course, hey, I go to therapy, or hey, I went to treatment, and that is totally okay. But just remember that, people follow our lead, especially those of us that are, more experienced attorneys. And if they do not see you taking care of yourself, if they do not see you taking time for yourself, they aren't going to do it. Michelle, do you agree with that?
Oh, totally. That is such a great point. That, we will go speak at wellness, fairs for a firm, and the only people who come are the support staff. No attorneys come because the leadership doesn't come down. And, I think it's important to set that example. And, leadership at a law firm is crucial. So be vulnerable if you can. And this slide is pretty simple. We're going to just breeze through, but intervention with a professional. So there are people who will work with a team of people around an attorney or somebody with substance use disorder to intervene. And that's different than peer-to-peer. So in Texas, we have peer support volunteers who, when somebody calls us and says, I'm struggling and I'd like to talk to someone who's been where I am now, we have that, and that's the lowercase I. As a lawyer, there's so much relief when you understand that there are other people who struggle, right? Just to have the space to talk about what's going on. And Erica, I think your work is, you have a lot of attorney clients now, and the relief that you hear when somebody says, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one, because I've created a diagnosis that attorneys have, and it's fake. This is all made up, but I call it terminal uniqueness disorder. We all think we're the only one.
That's not in the DSM. It's not in the DSM, but it should be.
It's a fake diagnosis, but we all think we're the only one, and we're not. We're part of the human race, despite years of expensive education. Next slide, please. So I think I like the first one. This is the Ted Lasso rule to intervention: be curious, not judgmental.
I like that.
Don't be judgmental. You're not qualified to diagnose. If you're, what I tell people, even if you do all the things on the bottom, express care and concern, a lot of times when you confront someone, they're going to be defensive. And I think that what I usually tell people is, so keep the door open for future conversations. I definitely think that's important. If you're in a firm, I generally tell people, if the person is defensive and leaves, I would let them know that we're going to have a conversation in 24 hours, and please come back to that conversation with some things that you're going to do to address are my concerns. That's if you're in a supervisory role. So I don't think, expect defensiveness, but plan for it so that you can't just get away without addressing the crux of the concern.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a broken record here and just say, and Michelle, you might have been getting to this, but, if you are thinking you're to the point of doing an intervention with someone, call your LAP, get some information from them on how to do it or who to contact to help you through it, because interventions can be tough. And for everyone. No one's looking forward to an intervention, either the person the group that's having one or the person that's going to be involved. And so please utilize your LAPs to get some really good information on how best to do something like this.
So in terms of resources, there's the COLAP link that was already here. That will get you to whatever your lawyer assistance program is for your state. The other resources listed here are excellent. SAMHSA, local and national treatment centers. And one of the things your LAP might have is recommendations for substance use treatment centers that other lawyers have been to and said these are effective. So because there's so many treatment programs, it's good to kind of know where you're looking. So that's another use of the lawyer assistance program. Next slide.
Yep.
These are some specialized treatment programs for legal professionals. And we have the research that said these can be more effective. So good to look for. And Erica is a living example of that the local, not specialized treatment program worked for her too. So I'd say, one of the things I do with the LAP is if we have a special question, what kind of, a treatment program, I will look and email. There's a director's list for the lawyer assistance programs. I'll ask them, hey, has anyone heard of this treatment program? Is it good? What's your experience? So use the LAP as a resource. And I think we're winding down. The next slide.
Yes, at this time, we'd like to welcome you to ask questions. We have a lot of great questions coming in. We always love to have Michelle and Erica. They're just such a wealth of knowledge. So we'll start at this one. What are the signs of an impending relapse?
Erica?
Some things to look for are those changes in behavior that we talked about earlier. Isolation, changes in behavior, changes in sleep pattern, not contacting, if it's someone that and you'll have a regular kind of communication pattern, if that changes. Also, if someone who is in recovery has had a very big trauma, like a death in the family, these things can kind of trigger that. Oh, and I see a question right now. It says, why don't you mention AA as a resource? I am a card-carrying member of AA. You can't carry cards in AA. But, 12-step AA has been a really big part of my continued recovery, and that is another resource for those of you. Some people don't respond to AA. It absolutely was a big part of my journey in recovery, so that is absolutely another resource. Okay, I just went off the map. But that would be where I would go worried about a relapse.
Right. I think AA is a great resource as well. And a lot of lawyer assistance programs also have different support groups for lawyers that is different than an AA group, but where lawyers, if you're the only lawyer in town, going to an AA meeting sometimes seems threatening. So check. There's a lot of online group support, but definitely AA is an excellent resource.
And this is one that many of us have perhaps encountered Are there any differences in how you recommend approaching a colleague who is a, quote, traditional alcoholic versus a binge drinker?
For it, Michelle.
Sure. I think if you have concerns about someone, it doesn't matter whether they're traditional or a binge drinker. You want to just say that, like, I've noticed these behaviors. A lot of times what people do is, as mentioned in the slides, denial is a huge part of substance use disorder before you get treatment. And somebody says, I'm not an alcoholic, I just, binge drink occasionally. If the substance gets in the way of your life, then, treatment is recommended. And so I think, we all approach people differently because of who they are and who we are, but I think you're dealing with a similar issue. It's a persistent use of a substance that impairs your life. So
Agreed.
that's okay, thanks.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And lastly, really quickly, do labs help with ADHD?
Absolutely.
Michelle, let it rip.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a DSM diagnosis, and LAPS can help with that. I think it's important to address that with a mental health professional. Sometimes people, especially law students, want a diagnosis for ADHD to get accommodations in law school. That's a different process. But typically the lab will have somebody who can help you talk through what are the symptoms or help you find somebody who can diagnose or treat you. So I would say absolutely. What labs help with, we help with mental health and substance use disorders. And when people call us about their kids, that's not our specialty, but we will Google and help and talk to colleagues and try and find the resources. So I know many of the lab directors around the country, and people are there to help. So please call.
I agree. An excellent job, Michelle.
Great job to you both. At this point, we are out of time for further questions. That concludes today's event. I would also like to thank our speakers, Erica and Michelle. Thanks so much. Have a great day.